The fire was nearly dead, and shadows crawled across the floorboards like things with hunger. He sat alone at the table, hunched over stew that had long gone cold. The wind howled outside, clawing at the windows, but the sound he was waiting for was different. It came soft, too soft for a man with a gun, too steady for a traveler lost in the dark. A knock, then silence. He held his spoon midair, listening to the blood pound in his own ears. The rifle was by the door, where it always was, but he didn't reach for it. Another knock, just as quiet, just as certain. He rose from the chair, a tall man mid-30s, built of rope and wire and bad memories. His hands were calloused from work, but also from violence. He knew the difference. Outside, the porch lantern swung in the wind, throwing a pale, ghostly light onto the steps. And on those steps stood a woman. Her eyes were wild, her dress was worn thin. Two small children clung to her skirt, their faces pale and hollowed out by the cold. One was a boy, maybe 6, clutching a dirty satchel. The other, a girl even younger, swimming in boots that were never meant for her. The woman didn't shiver. She just blinked once and said 5 words that would change everything. They ain't yours, but they need you. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. On a good day, words were a struggle. This was not a good day. Finally, he managed to grind out a sentence. "You're at the wrong place." "No," she said, her voice flat, without a trace of pleading. "I'm not." The boy's lip trembled, but he held it in. The little girl just pressed her face deeper into her mother's dress. He couldn't see them clearly, just shapes of desperation cut out of the darkness. He took a step forward, close enough to smell the mud and sweat and cheap soap on her. She wasn't a drifter. Her boots were patched, her dress had been mended more than once. "Who sent you?" he asked, his voice low and hard. "No one," she said. "Not lately." He let the silence hang there, heavy and cold. He let the wind bite at her, at the children. He wanted to see if she would break. She didn't. So he did something else. He stepped back, and he slammed the door in her face. The bolt shot home with a sound like a breaking bone. He stood there in the dark, his hand on the wood, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He hated that he could still hear her voice in his head, not begging, but stating a fact he wasn't ready to hear. He didn't sleep that night, and he knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. The next morning, they were still there, huddled together on the porch like a family of ghosts refusing to move on. The children were tucked under her thin shawl, their small bodies rigid with cold. He cursed, a low guttural sound in the back of his throat, and swung the heavy door wide open. "You'll take breakfast in the barn," he grunted. The woman just nodded. She didn't thank him, and for some reason, he respected that. They moved slow, their limbs stiff. The boy glanced back at the house just once, his eyes wide, as if trying to memorize it before it disappeared. In his small hand, he clutched a tin soldier with a missing head. Inside the barn, the air was thick with the smell of hay and animal warmth. He handed her a bundle, stale bread, a strip of jerky, 2 hard apples. He turned to leave, but his own voice stopped him. "Why me?" he asked, his back still to her. "Out of all the doors in this whole damn territory, why'd you knock on mine?" She didn't answer right away. She carefully broke a piece of bread and gave it to her daughter. Then she looked at him, her eyes catching the thin morning light. "Because yours was the only name I remembered." He didn't ask what she meant by that. He was afraid of the answer. Later that afternoon, the boy followed him out to the fence line. He didn't ask permission. He just appeared, his oversized boots sinking into the spring mud. He watched the man work, his gaze steady and serious, as he hammered a loose rail back into its post. "You know how to work?" the rancher asked, his voice dry as dust. The boy just nodded. "Then hold the nail bucket, and don't wander." The boy held it. He only dropped it once, when a rabbit darted out from the brush, and his face flushed with shame. The man didn't yell. He just grunted, picked up the scattered nails, and went back to work. When the fence was mended, he tore off a piece of jerky and handed it to the boy. "Don't eat it near the horses," he said. "They'll come sniffing." A smile broke across the boy's face, bright and sudden. He turned and ran back toward the barn, but halfway there he stopped and waved. The man didn't wave back. He just watched until the boy was gone. That evening, he found a drawing pinned to the barn door. It was done in crayon on the back of an old church bulletin. 3 stick figures, 2 small, 1 tall. They were all holding hands. He stared at it for a long time, longer than he'd stared at anything in years. He knew he should have sent them away that morning. He knew they were trouble. But he was starting to realize he'd already made his choice the moment he opened the door a second time. He went into the barn that night after the sun had bled out behind the hills. The children were already asleep in a mound of hay, their breathing soft and even. The woman was standing by the lantern, and the light caught the glint of steel in her hands. She was sharpening a kitchen knife. The sound was slow, deliberate, scraping against the stone. "If you're thinking of robbing me," he said, leaning against a stall post, "you picked a poor mark." She didn't look up, but a small, humorless smirk touched her lips. "If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead already." She held up the blade. "I was cleaning this to gut a rabbit." He didn't ask where she'd found a rabbit in the dark. He just folded his arms. "You still haven't told me your name." She set the knife down, the sound echoing in the quiet barn. "Would it matter? Makes it easier to know whether to trust you." This time she did look at him, and for the first time, he saw past the exhaustion and the desperation. He saw a grief so thick it could choke a man. "I was married once," she said, her voice low, "to a man who drank his luck away at the card tables. When he ran out of money, he ran out of sense. He promised the boy. To a man who collects debts." The barn suddenly felt colder. "When I told him no," she continued, her voice hardening, "he raised his hand to me. So I took the children, and I ran. I didn't stop running until the horse fell dead, right out from under me. I heard about this place on a whisper." He thought of the single, unmarked stone that sat on a small hill not 30 yards from where they stood. His brother's grave. And he remembered the promise he'd made over that patch of dirt. Never again. Never let someone suffer under his roof if he could stop it. "You said you knew my name," he said, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. She nodded. "Your brother. He used to bring supplies to the town I lived in. One winter he gave me a coat, said his little brother back home never did learn to button it up right." The ghost of his brother filled the space between them, a memory of a good man, a memory that shamed him. "These children," he asked, needing to know. "They his?" He meant her husband. "No," she said softly. And then she delivered the final blow. "But they need someone who remembers what kindness smells like." He turned and walked out without another word, because he was afraid if he stayed, he might remember too. And remembering was a dangerous thing. 4 days passed. 4 days of silence and sideways glances. They shared the land, but not the house, not a single word more than was necessary. The boy became his shadow, following him on his chores, his small voice filled with questions about cattle and fence posts and how to tell if a snake was poison. The girl was quieter. She stayed close to her mother, but he saw her, just once, feeding a slice of an apple to his old hound dog. A dog that hadn't let a stranger touch it since the war. At night he'd hear the woman humming, It wasn't a song he recognized. It was low and mournful, a melody of loss. He wanted to ask her what she was running from, the real reason she came to his door. But he bit the words back every time, because if he asked, she might tell him the truth, and the truth always has a price. Then came the fourth night. He was on the porch, carving a piece of wood when he saw it. A plume of dust on the far ridge. One rider, maybe two, moving fast, moving with purpose. He let out a low whistle. The woman came out of the barn, her eyes already searching the horizon. The children were right behind her. "Get back in the barn," he said, his voice flat and urgent. "Now!" She didn't argue. She just herded the children inside and grabbed the kitchen knife from her belt. He noticed her hand was perfectly steady. The rider pulled up at the fence line, his horse lathered and breathing hard. He was a tall man in a black duster, his face hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. "You the one harboring a thief?" the rider called out, his voice like gravel. "The one running with two brats and a stolen name?" The rancher stepped off the porch, his own rifle held low, but ready. "Depends who's asking." The man in black grinned, a flash of white in the growing dusk. "No one you want to meet twice. I'm here on business. She's got something that don't belong to her." "She don't belong to anyone," the rancher said, his voice cold as a grave. "Move on." The rider's eyes gleamed. "Didn't expect to find a hero way out here. Just a man living with ghosts. I ain't a hero." "No," the rider said, turning his horse slow. "You're a fool." He rode off, not like a man in retreat, but like a wolf circling its prey, a promise hanging in the air. The rancher watched until the dust settled, until the silence returned. Then he turned, walked back inside the house, and bolted the door. The woman was waiting for him, the children huddled behind her. "Pack light," he said, not looking at her. "We might not be staying long." She let out a breath she'd been holding. "You believe me now?" He didn't answer. But that night he moved a second blanket into the barn. And when the wind picked up again, it didn't bring a knock. It brought the feeling of something colder. Something coming. Something that wouldn't be turned away twice. The fog was thick the next morning, clinging to the ground like a shroud. The world was gray and silent. He stood on the porch, a tin cup of coffee in his hand, his eyes scanning the property line. Nothing. But the quiet was worse than the rider. The woman stepped out of the barn. She was wearing his old coat, the sleeves rolled up, a piece of rope cinched around her waist for a belt. She moved with a purpose now, not just desperation. She filled a pail at the pump and disappeared back inside without a word. 5 days. 5 days of living like ghosts in the same space. They didn't talk about the man in the black duster. They didn't talk about where she was from or where they might go. They just existed, the silence between them a language of its own. That evening the boy followed him out to the eastern fence line. He carried the nail tin without being asked. "Think you can do it?" the man grunted, handing him the hammer. The boy nodded, his small hands wrapping around the heavy handle. His first swing missed the nail entirely and slammed into the post. He winced, looking up, expecting to be yelled at. "Try again," the man said. He did. The next swing hit, then another and another. Crooked, but solid. When the rail was secure, the boy stood a little taller. "Tomorrow, we do the western line," the man said, handing him a piece of jerky. "Bring better boots." The boy's laughter was the only sound as he ran back to the barn. Later, the little girl found him on the steps. She silently handed him a small, smooth stone. "It's got a hole in it," she whispered, "like the moon." He looked down at the stone in his rough palm. It did. That night, for the first time, he let them sleep in the house. In the guest room, a room that hadn't been opened in 5 years. It smelled of cedar and dust and memories he tried to keep buried. After they were asleep, he sat by the fire, listening to the woman's footsteps on the floorboards above him. A soft creak, a quiet sigh, then stillness. The next day, he found her at the creek, scrubbing their clothes on the rocks, her hands raw and red from the icy water. "You'll freeze your fingers off," he said. "I've done worse," she answered without looking up. He stood there for a moment. "Where'd you learn to fight like that? You held that knife like you knew how to use it." She stopped scrubbing and stood up slowly. "A man taught me, not my husband. Someone kinder. There ain't many of those left," he muttered. "No," she said, her eyes meeting his. "There ain't." He tossed her a bar of soap. It smelled faintly of lilac, something his mother used to use. He didn't explain where he got it. He just turned and walked away. That evening she joined him on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and blood red. The children were nearby, the girl curled up against the old hound, the boy practicing knots with a piece of rope. "He looks up to you," she said quietly. "He shouldn't." "Why not?" He took a long breath, the air burning his lungs. "Because I've done things that a boy shouldn't look up to." "So has every man still breathing," she said, her gaze steady. They sat in silence for a while. Then she spoke again. "They ask about you, the children." "What do they ask?" "Mostly they ask what you used to be." He didn't say anything. "I told them," she said, "that you were a man who still had good wood in the fire, even if the flames had gotten low." A rough, short laugh escaped his lips. "That ain't true." "No," she said softly, "but maybe it could be." He looked out at the long shadows stretching from the hills. He had to ask, "They're your blood, the children?" She blinked, surprised by the question. "No." And then the next twist. "Their mother was my sister. She died giving birth to the girl. Their father, he was gone 2 winters later. I took them because no one else would." The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they were making was darker than he imagined. 2 more days passed. No sign of the rider. A fragile peace settled over the ranch. He found himself walking softer, listening to the sound of the children's laughter. He was starting to forget. He was starting to feel something other than tired. That changed on the 7th day. He was chopping wood when he saw it. A flicker of movement on the ridge. A single rider watching the house. He ducked low, grabbing his rifle from its hook on the porch. He scanned the trees. The rider was gone. He didn't tell her what he saw, but that night he checked the locks twice. He loaded extra shells. The woman watched him. "You saw something." It wasn't a question. "I did." "You think he's coming back?" "I know he is." She stepped closer. "We can leave. We can run." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "You can't, and I won't." "Why?" "Because running never worked for me," he said, his voice raw. "And it damn sure won't work for them." Just then the boy came into the room, his face pale. He was holding a splintered piece of wood. "I found this by the shed." Carved into the wood were 3 initials. A.R.S. The rancher went cold. "Where exactly?" "Near the smokehouse." He took the board and went outside. The dirt around the smokehouse was disturbed. Someone had been here. They had walked the perimeter, tested the windows. They had been close, very close. He went back inside. The air in the house was thick, heavy. He turned to the woman. "There's something else," he said. "Something you're not telling me." Her face went white. "He's not after me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was never after me." "Then who?" "He's after the boy." The little boy looked up, his eyes wide with fear. Why me? She knelt down, her hands on his small shoulders. Because your father wasn't just a gambler. He was a Pinkerton informant. He was undercover with a gang of land thieves when you were born. And they think you know where he hid the records. The rancher stood frozen. Then he walked to the fire and tossed the piece of wood into the flames. He watched the initials char and turn to ash. The name on that board, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Aris. That was the man who killed my brother. The woman looked up, her eyes filled with a new kind of horror. I didn't know. I believe you. Just then, a sound cut through the night. A whistle. 3 sharp notes, then silence. The dog growled, low in its throat. Get the children upstairs, the rancher said, his voice like ice. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, into the swallowing darkness. Another whistle, closer this time. He tightened his grip on the rifle stock. This wasn't about a woman on the run anymore. This wasn't about a boy with a secret. This was about revenge. And it had finally come to his door. He moved through the night like a ghost, his boots making no sound on the familiar dirt. The moon was a sick, yellow sliver behind the clouds. The wind had died. The whole world was holding its breath. He saw him behind the barn, a stooped figure working at the window with a piece of wire. The rancher raised his rifle. You're a long way from home. The figure froze, then slowly stood, his hands raised. In the dim light, the rancher could see he was scrawny, with a milky white eye and clothes that stank of fear. Don't shoot, the man rasped. I ain't here to kill nobody. Then why are you picking at my window like a thief? He sent me, the man whimpered. Eris, he just wants the boy. Says if you hand the brat over, he'll ride out. No one else gets hurt. The rancher stepped closer, the shadows making his face a mask of fury. I ain't handing over a damn thing. He'll come for him anyway. I'm just the warning. The butt of the rifle slammed into the man's gut. He collapsed, gasping for air. The rancher dragged him into the old smokehouse and chained him to a meat hook. You make a sound, the rancher said, his voice deadly quiet, and I'll forget I left you breathing. He locked the heavy door and went back to the house. The woman was pacing, the kitchen knife in her hand. The children were huddled under the table. A scout, he said. Nothing more. Will they come tonight? She asked. No. Men like Eris. They like the daylight. They want you to see it coming. The next day was hot and still. The air was thick with dust and dread. He questioned the man in the smokehouse again. The scout, feeling bolder in the light, spat on the floor. He's riding with 2 others, he sneered. Crack shots, both of them. They'll wait till you're tired. Maybe they'll burn the barn first. Start with the dog, maybe. The rancher's hand tightened on his rifle. You afraid yet? The man taunted. No, the rancher said. I'm remembering. That afternoon, he did something he never thought he'd do. He took the boy out behind the barn and taught him how to shoot. The rifle was too heavy, the kickback too strong. But the boy's hands were steady. He listened. He didn't flinch. Did you ever kill a man? The boy asked, his voice small. The rancher nodded once. Why? Because he needed it. The boy didn't ask any more questions. Inside, the woman was boiling herbs on the stove. He watched her for a moment. You knew him, didn't you? Aris. She stopped stirring. Not by name, but by his deeds. He was one of the men my husband gambled with, one of the ones who laughed. Her hands were trembling, he noticed. Not from fear, from memory. That night, the scout in the smokehouse tried to escape. They found him dangling from the window, the chain wrapped around his leg, blood smeared on the wall. He had almost made it. Almost. The rancher stood over him with a shotgun. "Try that again," he said, "and I'll feed what's left of you to the hogs." The man spat blood. "He'll make you beg. You think you're some righteous hero? You're just another man about to die." "Maybe," the rancher said, "but I'm harder to kill than I look." 2 mornings later, they woke to the smell of smoke, not from a fire. It was gunpowder, a warning shot, fired somewhere on the ridge. "They're here," the woman said, her voice flat. He didn't need to be told. He gathered the ammunition. He loaded every weapon in the house. He dug shallow foxholes behind the shed. "Get the children in the cellar," he told her. She hesitated at the door. "You can't do this alone." "I'm not alone," he said, looking at her. "You're here." She touched his arm just for a second. Then she was gone. When the sun was high and hot in the sky, they came. 3 riders, moving slow and deliberate out of the trees. Aris was in the lead, his black duster flapping in the breeze, his face a landscape of cruelty. The rancher stepped onto the porch. "This ends now, boy," Aris yelled. "It ended the day you put my brother in the ground," the rancher called back. Aris blinked, then threw his head back and laughed, a horrible, grating sound. "That squealing pig from Bitter Creek? He died easy." The rancher didn't say a word. He just raised his rifle. "Give us the boy, and we ride out," Aris shouted. "You keep him, and we burn this whole damn place to the soil. He's not yours to take. He ain't yours either." "He is now," Aris raised his hand. "Last chance." The rancher fired. One of the riders dropped from his saddle, a clean shot through the chest. And then the world erupted in gunfire. Bullets splintered the wood of the porch rail. The rancher dove for cover, firing back, sharp and fast. The dog yelped, a bullet grazing its leg. From a window in the house, the woman watched. She saw the third rider break away, circling toward the barn, trying to flank them. She slipped out the back door, moving through the tall grass. The rider dismounted, his back to her. He raised his pistol, but he never got the shot off. The woman fired the shotgun once. The man fell without a sound. Her hands shook then, but not before. Aris screamed in rage and charged the house on foot. The rancher stepped out from behind the water barrel to meet him. Blood was running from a gash on his arm. They stood 10 paces apart. "You're gonna die for a stranger's brat," Aris roared. "He ain't a stranger anymore," the rancher said. Aris fired first. The bullet went wide. The rancher's bullet didn't. It hit Aris square in the chest. His eyes went wide with shock. His mouth opened, but only blood came out. He fell to the dirt, and then there was silence. The woman came onto the porch, her face pale. "You're hurt." "I've been worse." He looked down at the blood soaking his shirt. "So I am." The cellar door creaked open, and the boy peeked out. Is it safe now?" The rancher looked at the bodies in his yard. He looked at the woman and the 2 small children who had brought this war to his doorstep. He nodded. For now, they buried the dead at the edge of the property. The scout from the smokehouse begged for his life. The rancher gave him a choice: leave now and never come back, or be planted in the ground with the rest of them. The man ran and didn't look back. The next morning, the woman found him by the barn, cleaning his rifle. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Why did you stand for us?" He didn't look at her. "Because I remember what it's like to be unwanted." "You still feel that way?" He paused, then finally turned to face her. "Not today." She took a step closer. "You should rest. You're bleeding again." He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. "You gonna watch over me?" "If you'll let me," she said. He stood up, slow and stiff, and handed her the rifle. "I trust you." She took it. In the distance, the boy was chasing the dog through the field. The girl was picking wildflowers. A peace had settled over the ranch, not like a bright light, but like a warmth that seeps into your bones after a long, hard winter. He knew people would talk. They'd ask questions about who she was, why she was here. "What will you tell them?" he asked her later as they sat on the porch. She looked out at the rolling hills. "I'll tell them I came looking for a little kindness, and I found it behind a door I didn't think would ever open." He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it, "I'm glad you knocked." The fire had been out for hours, but the fight was still burning inside him. He sat at the kitchen table, shirtless, while she stitched the gash on his side. Her touch was careful, her focus absolute. The children were asleep finally, the terror of the day given way to exhausted peace. "You should have let me bleed out," he said, his voice rough. She didn't look up from her work. "You could have taken the children and run," she replied. "They wouldn't have left you behind." That shut him up. When she was finished, she sat across from him. The lantern light carved shadows on her face. "I have to tell you something," she said. "I knew your brother, not just from town." He waited. The house was silent. "I was there," she whispered. "I was at Bitter Creek the day he died." He felt the air leave his lungs. He said nothing. "My husband," she continued, her voice trembling. "He took me with him. He said it was for supplies. I didn't know what he was planning until the shooting started. I saw your nephew. He was hiding under a table. I tried to pull him out." His voice was like stone. "That was my nephew." "I know," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "The roof was on fire. A beam fell. I pulled him out, but he was already gone." His hands clenched into fists on the tabletop, the knuckles white. "You never told me," he said, the words full of cold fury. "I was afraid." "It matters," he bit out. "He was wearing a blue scarf," she said softly. "You tied it for him, didn't you?" His jaw twitched. "I kept it," she confessed. "I buried him with it." He looked away, the old guilt rising in him like a flood. He was supposed to be there that day. He was supposed to meet his brother, but he'd been drunk, angry at the world, and he never showed up. "Why come here?" he asked, his voice raw with pain. "Why bring his killer's ghost to my door?" "Because," she said, her own voice breaking, "I wanted to see if a man like your brother could have a brother worth saving." He had no answer for that. Later that night they sat on the porch, a jug of whiskey passing between them. The stars were out, sharp and cold. "I ain't good at forgiveness," he said, taking a long drink. "I'm not asking for it," she replied. "Then what are you asking for?" She looked out into the darkness. Somewhere to stop running. He thought about that for a long time. "You're not the same girl who was at Bitter Creek," he said finally. She looked at him. "And you're not the same man who didn't show up." The truth of her words hit him harder than any bullet. "The girl thinks you're made of stone," she said after a while. "And the boy, he thinks you're the one thing in this world that won't break on him." "I ain't made for children," he muttered. "No one is," she said. "Not until they're staring up at you, waiting to see what you'll become." She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "What do you see when you look at me?" He didn't have to think about it. "I see a woman who walked through hellfire and didn't come out as ash." He stood up, his joints aching. "We've got fencing to mend tomorrow." She just nodded. Inside, the children were asleep by the hearth, curled up with the dog. In the quiet of the house, he paused at her door. "Thank you," she whispered from the darkness. "For what?" "For opening the door." He didn't dream of Bitter Creek that night. For the first time in years, he didn't dream at all. He woke before dawn. the feeling of her hand in his, the only thing that was real. The quiet that followed the storm was the strangest part. For weeks, the ranch was still, the dust settled, the blood washed away with the rain. But the peace was fragile, like thin ice over deep water. He found himself watching the ridgeline, listening for the sound of hoofbeats that never came. The woman and the children settled in, not like guests, but like parts of the landscape that had always been there. The boys' laughter started to fill the empty spaces in the house. The girl planted wildflowers by the porch steps. The woman, whose name he learned was Sarah, moved through the rooms with a quiet grace, chasing away the ghosts he'd lived with for so long. One afternoon he came back from the fields to find the boy sitting on the top rail of the corral, a book in his lap. "Where'd you get that?" he asked. "Mama's satchel," the boy said. "It was my pa's." It was a small, leather-bound journal. The rancher's blood ran cold. The records. This was it, the reason all those men had died. "What's it say?" he asked, his voice tight. The boy shrugged. "Just numbers and names. Pa was teaching me to read 'em. Said it was a map to a treasure. It wasn't a treasure map. It was a list. A list of every member of Aris's gang, every crime they'd committed, every official they'd paid off. It was enough to burn the whole corrupt county to the ground." The boy's father hadn't hidden the records. He'd been turning his own son into the record. Sarah came out onto the porch. "I didn't know what it was," she said, her face pale. "Not until after. I just knew I had to protect him." He looked from the book, to the boy, to her. The weight of it all settled on his shoulders. This wasn't over. It was just a lull in the storm. "We have to burn it," he said. "No," Sarah said, stepping forward. "If we burn it, they died for nothing. Your brother, my sister's husband, all of them." She was right. Justice had to be done. Not with a gun this time, but with the truth. That night, he rode into town for the first time in years. He walked into the sheriff's office, a place he'd avoided like the plague, and threw the leather-bound journal onto the desk. The sheriff, a fat man with beady eyes, picked it up. As he flipped through the pages, the color drained from his face. His name was in there. This is dangerous," the sheriff stammered. "That's the point," the rancher said. He left the book and rode out, not knowing if he'd just signed his own death warrant or finally bought their freedom. The next few days were tense. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like a horse. Then, one morning, a U.S. Marshal rode up to the ranch. He was a tall, grim-faced man who looked like he'd seen it all. "You the man who delivered this?" he asked, holding up the journal. The rancher nodded. The marshal looked around at the small ranch, at the woman watching from the porch, at the two children playing in the yard. "You made a lot of powerful enemies," the marshal said, "and a few powerful friends. The law thanks you." He turned to ride away, then paused. "That brother of yours," he said. "He was a good man, tried to do the right thing in a place full of wrong. With that, he was gone." And for the first time, the rancher felt the heavy weight of the past lift. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer a chain around his neck. That evening, as the sun set, he sat on the porch with Sarah. The children were asleep inside. The air was cool and clean. "It's over," she said quietly. "It's finally over." "Yeah," he said. He reached over and took her hand, her fingers laced with his, a perfect fit of rough calluses and delicate scars. "What happens now?" she asked. He looked at her, at the strength and the hope in her eyes. He thought of the empty house he'd lived in for so long, and how it was now filled with life. He thought of the silence that had been replaced by laughter. "Now," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "we've fixed the western fence." She smiled back, and in that smile, he saw a future he never thought he'd have. a family he never knew he wanted, a home. If you enjoyed this story of a dark past and a second chance, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from the shadows.